great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
There is a hidden mineral that keeps America's military running, and without it, jet engines fail and submarines cannot be built and missiles stop working. The United States depends on Canada for approximately 50% of this resource, and America has only one mine and 0 refineries. Recent tariffs just made this critical material much more expensive, and military readiness is now at stake. Canada is the biggest supplier of nickel alloys to the United States, supplying roughly half of total US nickel needs, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Nickel alloys are a critical input for the defense and automotive industries, and the United States only has one operating nickel mine called Lundin's Eagle Mine in northern Michigan. However, the United States does not have a single completed nickel refinery, which makes Canada an important ally in the nickel supply chain. The entirety of nickel output from Lundin's Eagle Mine is exported to a refinery in Sudbury, Canada, and then sold back to US firms. Eagle Mine is the nation's only primary nickel mine, and the mine was expected to produce 360 million pounds of nickel and 295 million pounds of copper over its mine life from 2014 to mid-2025. The mine is slated to close around 2026 unless it secures more ore. Vale-based metals provides roughly 50 to 60% of the high-purity nickel used in US military applications, according to a November 2025 document submitted to the Office of the United States Trade Representative. Several US nickel projects currently under development plan to follow the same model by sending concentrate to Canada for smelting and refining until domestic capacity is built. Nickel is a critical material in many military applications due to its strength and corrosion resistance and its ability to form superalloys. It is a vital component in the steel alloys used in armor and defense systems for armor plating in vehicles and ships and personnel equipment. Nickel is also an important part of jet engines, and nickel-based superalloys are essential in jet engines for military aircraft due to their ability to withstand high temperatures and stress, according to CSIS analysis. Nickel-based superalloys contain between 50 and 60% nickel content, and these superalloys are essential in turbine blades and discs, given their resistance to high temperatures and stress. Nickel is used for missile casings and guidance systems, and it is used in armor plating, in vehicles and ships and personnel equipment, as well as in the hulls of warships and submarines. Nickel is also essential for military batteries and various defense electronics. The consequences of tariffs would be particularly profound for the defense industry and nuclear energy and heavy manufacturing, according to CSIS Director Gracelyn Bhaskaran. As the United States races to reduce its reliance on China for minerals vital for national, economic, and energy security, tariffs with Canada may drastically undermine these efforts. Canada is the biggest source of US mineral imports, providing key sources of uranium, aluminum, nickel, steel, copper, and niobium. In 2023, Canada accounted for $47 billion of United States mineral imports, and China followed with $28.3 billion. A 25% tariff on Canadian mineral imports could cost US off-takers an additional $11.75 billion, and that figure would increase as base metal and uranium prices recover. Canada would likely adopt retaliatory tariffs, as they did when President of the United States Donald Trump imposed Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Canada in 2018 and 2020. On the defense front, China is making significant investments in munitions and acquiring high-end weapon systems and equipment at a rate of 5 to 6 times faster than the United States, according to CSIS estimates. China is also the world's largest shipbuilder and has a shipbuilding capacity that is roughly 230 times larger than the United States. Undermining the cost competitiveness of mineral inputs like nickel and aluminum is likely going to be a deterrent to accelerating domestic manufacturing efforts for vital defense technologies, Bhaskaran stated. The impact of tariffs would be compounded by the highly integrated nature of key supply chains. Minerals mined in the United States or Canada often move back and forth across the border as they undergo various stages of processing and manufacturing. Automotive parts and components can cross the borders between Canada, the United States, and Mexico up to 8 times before being incorporated into the final assembly. If the United States imposes levies on Canadian nickel, it might have to import more of the mineral from overseas as domestic production capacity is limited. CSIS expects that the United States might look to Indonesia as a supplier. However, the Indonesian nickel industry is dominated by Chinese mining companies, and thus tariffs estimated to cost U.S. firms an additional $260 million could work against U.S. government efforts to reduce reliance on China. According to U.S. Geological Survey data, from 2020 to 2023, Canada accounts for 46% of primary nickel imports to the United States. Norway provides 11%, Australia, 8% Brazil, 6% in other countries, 29%. In 2024, nickel recovered from scrap accounted for approximately 54% of apparent consumption in the United States. The leading uses for primary nickel in the United States are alloys and steels and electroplating, and other uses including catalysts and chemicals. Stainless and alloy steel and nickel containing alloys typically account for more than 85% of domestic nickel consumption. Most secondary nickel is in the form of nickel content of stainless steel scrap, and most recycled nickel is used to produce new alloys and stainless steel. In May 2024, the U.S. Department of Defense, under the Defense Production Act Title III, awarded a grant of $7 million to advance nickel production capacity. The Pentagon has been working to strengthen critical mineral supply chains, and in September 2023, the Department of Defense awarded $20.6 million to propose nickel mine projects in Michigan and Minnesota. This award exemplifies the Department of Defense's commitment to strengthening the resilience of critical supply chains and lessening reliance on foreign sources of vital minerals. On January 15, 2026, President of the United States, Donald Trump, signed an executive order titled Adjusting Imports of Processed Critical Minerals and Their Derivative Products into the United States. The order emphasizes the use of international cooperation to strengthen U.S. mineral security. The United States is fully import dependent for 12 critical minerals and reliant on imports for more than half of its consumption of an additional 29 minerals. The executive order directs the Secretary of Commerce to negotiate agreements with foreign partners to secure adequate U.S. supplies of processed minerals. These agreements are intended to incentivize cooperation on processing and refining and downstream capacity. If negotiations fail to produce timely or satisfactory outcomes, the order explicitly contemplates the use of trade remedies, such as tariffs or other import restrictions, to protect U.S. national security. Canada is a critical ally in U.S. efforts to reduce reliance on China for critical minerals, both for feedstock and midstream processing. During World War II, Canada contributed 95% of Allied nickel output, used for armor plating in tanks and anti-aircraft guns. The country also produced refined uranium for the Manhattan Project, and Canada's ability to complement U.S. industrial output and provide vast sums of raw materials was critical to Allied victory. The current situation reveals a stark vulnerability in American defense capabilities. The United States depends on Canada for roughly 50% of its nickel supply, and America has only one operating nickel mine and 0 completed nickel refineries. All U.S. mined nickel must be sent to Canada for processing before it can be used, and tariffs now threaten to disrupt this essential supply chain at a time when China is expanding its military capacity at unprecedented rates. Defense experts warn that undermining the cost competitiveness of critical mineral inputs will deter efforts to accelerate domestic manufacturing of vital defense technologies.